The dust kicked up around Sarah Vance's worn boots as she stumbled into Sonora, California in the scorching summer of 1878, her dress torn at the hem and her face streaked with dirt and desperation. But her green eyes held a fire that refused to be extinguished no matter how many times life had tried to snuff it out. She had walked 17 miles from the last mining camp where she had scrubbed floors and cooked meals for pennies, only to have the foreman try to force himself on her in the back room while his wife was away. Sarah had grabbed the cast iron skillet and swung hard, then ran without looking back. That was 3 days ago, and she had been surviving on creek water and wild berries ever since, sleeping under trees and pushing forward because that was what she always did. She pushed forward. The main street of Sonora bustled with afternoon activity. Miners fresh from the depleted gold claims wandered between saloons, merchants haggled over prices, and women in fine dresses picked their way carefully across the muddy thoroughfare. Sarah knew she looked like something the cat dragged in, but she held her head high as she approached the general store. She had $2.30 to her name, sewn into the lining of her sleeve, and she needed food more than pride. The store owner, a portly man with suspicious eyes, watched her like she might steal something. Sarah selected hardtack, dried beef, and a small bag of cornmeal, counting out her coins carefully on the counter. "You new in town?" he asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of her appearance. "I am looking for work," Sarah said, meeting his gaze directly. "Honest work. I can cook, clean, sew, keep books if needed. I can read and write and do sums." He snorted. "Try the boarding house down the street. Mrs. Chen sometimes needs help. Or the saloons always need girls." Sarah took her purchases without responding to the implication. She had heard it 1,000 times before. A woman alone, traveling with no family and no husband, must be desperate enough for any kind of work. And maybe she was desperate, but she had lines she would not cross, standards she clung to even when everything else had been stripped away. She had been born Sarah Elizabeth Vance in a small Tennessee town 22 years ago, the daughter of a schoolteacher father and a mother who died bringing her younger brother into the world. That brother had died of fever 2 years later. Her father had taught her everything he knew, filling her head with literature and mathematics and history, telling her she was destined for something more than being someone's property. Then he had died when she was 16, leaving her alone in a world that did not care about educated girls with no dowry and no connections. Sarah had tried. God, how she had tried. She worked as a teacher for a year until the school board decided a woman her age should be married instead of filling children's heads with ideas. She worked as a seamstress until the shop closed. She worked as a maid, a cook, a laundress. She went west thinking the frontier would offer more opportunities, more freedom. Instead, she found that men saw her as either a potential wife to control or a woman to use, and other women saw her as a threat or a cautionary tale. But Sarah Vance had never stopped trying to live. She had never given up, never surrendered, never let the world beat her down completely. Every time she fell, she got back up. Every time a door slammed in her face, she looked for a window. She was tired, bone-deep tired, but she kept going because the alternative was unthinkable. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure badly in need of paint. Sarah knocked on the door, and a small Chinese woman answered, her face lined with years but her eyes sharp and assessing. "Mrs. Chen?" Sarah asked, when the man at the general store said you might need help. Mrs. Chen looked her up and down. "You look like trouble." "I am the opposite of trouble," Sarah said firmly. "I am a hard worker who needs a job and a place to sleep. I will work for room and board until I prove myself. Then we can discuss wages." Something in Sarah's directness must have appealed to Mrs. Chen because she stepped aside. "I need someone to help with the cleaning and cooking. I have 12 rooms, usually full. Miners, cowboys, merchants passing through. You keep your door locked at night and you do not entertain men in your room. You break that rule, you are out immediately." "That will not be a problem," Sarah assured her. Mrs. Chen showed her to a tiny room on the first floor, barely big enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a door that locked and a window with a view of the hills beyond town. Sarah set down her meager bundle of possessions and felt something unclench in her chest. This would do. This would be a start. She worked harder than she had ever worked in her life over the next 2 weeks. She was up before dawn, heating water for the guests, preparing breakfast, washing linens, scrubbing floors, mending torn sheets, and cooking dinner. Mrs. Chen was exacting but fair, and she fed Sarah well, which was more than could be said for most of Sarah's previous employers. The older woman rarely smiled, but Sarah caught her nodding approvingly a few times when she thought Sarah was not looking. The boarding house guests were a rotating cast of characters. Some ignored Sarah completely. Others tried to engage her in conversation or flirtation. She remained polite but distant, focused on her work. She was building something here, a reputation, a foundation, and she would not let anyone jeopardize it. It was on a Wednesday morning in late July when Finn Emerson walked into the boarding house, and Sarah's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. She was coming down the stairs with an armload of linens when she saw him in the front hall, talking to Mrs. Chen about a room. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked with his body. His dark hair was too long, curling at his collar, and his face was tanned from the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting across long distances. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a quiet, watchful manner that reminded Sarah of a wolf, alert to everything around him. 2 weeks, he was saying to Mrs. Chen, maybe longer if the job runs over. I am working on the Peterson Ranch, helping them set up a new irrigation system from the creek. His voice was deep and measured, with a hint of an accent Sarah could not quite place. Not Southern, not Eastern, something else. Mrs. Chen took his money and handed him a key. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. Miss Vance will show you to your room. Sarah descended the last few stairs, balancing the linens. Finn Emerson turned to look at her, and their eyes met. His were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. For a moment, neither of them spoke. This way, Sarah said finally, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. You are in room 8, second floor. She led him up the stairs, very aware of his presence behind her. He moved quietly for a big man, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden steps. You work here? He asked. I do. How long have you been in Sonora? 2 weeks. Where are you from originally? Sarah stopped at room 8 and turned to face him. Tennessee. You ask a lot of questions. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. Sorry, habit from too much time alone on the trail. You stop talking to people, you forget how to do it properly. Despite herself, Sarah felt her mouth quirk into a small smile. Room 8. Dinner is at 7 sharp. Mrs. Chen does not hold plates for latecomers. Yes, madam, he said, and there was something in his tone that made it feel less like politeness and more like genuine respect. Sarah went back downstairs, but she found herself distracted for the rest of the day. She kept thinking about those storm cloud eyes and the way he had apologized for being forward. Most men did not apologize to women like her, women without protection or position. They took what they wanted and moved on. At dinner that evening, the boarding house dining room was full. Mrs. Chen had cooked a hearty stew with sourdough bread, and the guests ate with the single-minded focus of men who did hard labor. Finn Emerson sat at the far end of the table, eating quietly and listening to the conversations around him without contributing much. Sarah served the meal and cleaned up afterward, but she was aware of him the entire time. Once she looked up from refilling the water pitcher and found him watching her with an expression she could not read. Their eyes held for a heartbeat. Then he looked away first, returning his attention to his stew. The next morning, Sarah was up at her usual time, starting the fires and preparing breakfast. She was surprised when Finn Emerson appeared in the kitchen doorway just after 5, fully dressed and ready for the day. I know breakfast is not until 6, he said, but I need to be at the ranch early. Is there any way I could get some coffee and maybe a biscuit to take with me? Sarah should have said no. Mrs. Chen had rules for a reason. But something about his polite request, the way he asked instead of demanded, made her relent. Sit, she said, gesturing to the small table in the corner where she and Mrs. Chen took their own meals. I will make you something proper. She scrambled eggs and fried bacon, toasted bread, and poured strong coffee. Finn ate like a man who appreciated good food, not just shoveling it in, but actually tasting it. This is excellent, he said. Best meal I have had in months, maybe years. Where were you before Sonora? Sarah asked, sitting down across from him with her own cup of coffee. Mrs. Chen would not be up for another half hour, and it felt strange and intimate to be in the kitchen alone with this man in the gray dawn light. Montana. Before that, Wyoming. I go where the work is. I'm good with water, figuring out how to move it, store it, use it efficiently. Ranchers out here, they are figuring out that the old ways will not work with the drought patterns we have been having. They need new systems. That sounds like skilled work. It is. Took me years to learn it properly. He paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. What about you? What brings a woman like you to a place like this? Sarah stiffened. A woman like me? Educated, he said quietly. You carry yourself different. You talk different. This is not the life you were born to. She did not know whether to be offended or impressed by his perception. Life rarely turns out the way we plan. I go where I can find work, same as you. Fair enough. He finished his coffee and stood. Thank you for the meal. I mean it. You're welcome. He left, and Sarah sat alone in the kitchen as the sun began to paint the sky outside the window. She felt unsettled in a way she had not felt in years, like something was shifting beneath her feet. Over the next week, a pattern developed. Finn would appear in the kitchen each morning just after 5, and Sarah would make him breakfast. They talked while he ate, conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. She learned that he was 28, that he had left home at 16 after his father died, and the bank took their farm in Ohio. He had worked every job imaginable, learning as he went until he found his calling in water engineering, such as it was on the frontier. He learned that she had been a teacher, that she loved books more than almost anything, that she had been fighting to survive and maintain her dignity for 6 years now, and sometimes she was so tired she did not know how she kept going. You keep going because you're stronger than whatever gets thrown at you, he said one morning, his gray-blue eyes intense. I can see that about you, Sarah. You bend, but you do not break. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked away, suddenly overwhelmed by emotions she could not name. I should finish preparing the other breakfast, she said, standing abruptly. Finn caught her wrist gently as she passed, and the touch sent electricity through her entire body. Did I say something wrong? No, Sarah whispered. You said something very right, and I do not know how to respond to that. He released her immediately, but his eyes held hers. I am not like other men you have known, Sarah. I want you to understand that. I am beginning to, she said softly. The attraction between them grew like a living thing, impossible to ignore. Sarah found herself watching for Finn during the day, listening for his footsteps on the stairs, feeling her pulse quicken when he entered a room. She caught him looking at her when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression hungry but also tender, like she was something precious he was afraid to touch. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course. Nothing escaped the older woman's sharp eyes. The cowboy in room 8, she said one afternoon while she and Sarah were kneading bread dough. He looks at you. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. I have not encouraged him. I did not say you did. I said he looks at you, and you look back. Mrs. Chen's hands worked the dough rhythmically. He seems like a good man. Quiet, respectful, pays on time. Mrs. Chen, I am not looking for a man. I am looking to build a life. Sometimes those things are the same thing. Sometimes they are not. The older woman shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. I came to California with my husband in 1852. We were going to find gold and go back to China rich. Instead, he died of cholera 3 months after we arrived, and I was alone in a foreign country with no money and no way home. I could have given up. I could have done many things. Instead, I worked, I saved, I bought this boarding house. I built a life. Sarah had never heard Mrs. Chen speak about her past before. You never remarried? No. But not because I did not have chances. I did not remarry because the men who asked wanted a servant or a curiosity, not a partner. If I had met a man who saw me as an equal, who valued what I had built instead of trying to take it from me, maybe I would have made a different choice. She met Sarah's eyes directly. I am saying watch for the difference. Some men want to own you. Some men want to know you. Those are not the same thing. That conversation stayed with Sarah for days. She thought about it every time she saw Finn, every time they talked in the early morning kitchen, every time their hands brushed accidentally and lightning seemed to arc between them. 3 weeks into his stay, Finn asked her to go for a walk after dinner. Sarah knew she should say no. Mrs. Chen had rules, and fraternizing with guests was probably frowned upon even if it had not been explicitly stated. But Sarah was so tired of living by everyone else's rules, by everyone else's expectations. For once, she wanted to do something just because she wanted to. Yes, she said, I would like that. They walked to the edge of town as the sun set, painting the California hills in shades of gold and orange. Finn did not try to take her hand or touch her inappropriately. He simply walked beside her, matching his longer stride to hers, and talked about the irrigation project at the Peterson Ranch. The water comes down from the creek, but they were losing half of it to evaporation and poor channel design, he explained. I am building a system with covered channels and strategic placement to maximize efficiency. It is working better than they hoped. You love the work, Sarah observed. I can hear it in your voice. I do. There is something satisfying about solving a problem, about making something work better than it did before. He paused on a small rise that overlooked the town. What did you love about teaching? Sarah thought about it. I loved seeing understanding dawn on a child's face when they finally grasped something they had been struggling with. I loved knowing I was giving them tools they could use for the rest of their lives. I loved believing I was making a difference. She laughed bitterly. Then the school board decided that an unmarried woman my age was setting a bad example and let me go. Their loss, Finn said firmly, and the loss of all the children you could have taught. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun complete its descent below the horizon. The air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. Sarah, Finn said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart began to beat faster. All right? I've been alone for a long time, by choice mostly. I learned early that frontier life is hard, and dragging someone else into it seemed cruel. I focused on my work, on building skills and a reputation. I told myself that was enough. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Then I walked into Mrs. Chen's boarding house and saw you on those stairs, and something inside me woke up. Something I did not even know was sleeping. Sarah could barely breathe. Finn, I know you have been hurt. I know you have been fighting alone for years. I know you have every reason not to trust a man you have known for 3 weeks. His gray-blue eyes were intense in the gathering darkness, but I am asking you to consider trusting me anyway. Not immediately, not completely, just enough to see where this could go. Every rational part of Sarah's mind screamed at her to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember all the times she had been disappointed and betrayed, but her heart, that stubborn organ that had kept her going through everything, was saying something different. I am afraid, she admitted. I have built walls to survive, and I do not know how to lower them without losing myself completely. Finn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. I am not asking you to lose yourself. I am asking you to let me stand beside you while you find yourself. There is a difference. When he kissed her, gentle and questioning, Sarah felt those walls she had mentioned crack and splinter. She kissed him back, pouring years of loneliness and longing into the connection. feeling him respond with equal intensity. His arms came around her, solid and strong, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt safe. They broke apart slowly, both breathing hard. Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I am not leaving Sonora," he said. "The Petersons want me to stay on permanently to maintain the system and help other ranchers in the area. I was going to say yes anyway, but now I have a much better reason." Sarah laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "You are staying? If you want me to." "I want you to," she whispered. "God help me, I want you to." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Sarah felt like she was floating. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen when they entered, and she looked at their joined hands and Sarah's flushed face with knowing eyes. "I suppose this means I need to hire additional help," she said dryly, "when you marry and move out." Sarah started to protest, but Finn squeezed her hand gently. "Actually, Mrs. Chen, I was wondering if you might have a larger room available, one that could accommodate a married couple. I have steady work now, and I would rather stay somewhere that feels like home than move to some lonely rented room somewhere." Mrs. Chen considered this. "Room 3 on the second floor. It is twice the size of what you have now, with space for a proper bed and furnishings, but I charge more for it, and I expect married couples only." "How long would you give us to make that happen?" Finn asked calmly, as if they were discussing the weather and not Sarah's entire future. 3 months, enough time to do it properly." Mrs. Chen looked at Sarah. "If that is what you want, girl, do not let him rush you." Sarah looked at Finn, at this man who had walked into her life 3 weeks ago and somehow seen past all her defenses to the woman underneath. It was crazy. It was reckless. It was everything she had been taught not to do. It was also exactly what her heart wanted. 3 months, Sarah agreed. That gives us time to be certain. But even as she said it, Sarah was already certain. For the first time in 6 years, she was not just surviving. She was living. The next 3 months passed in a blur of happiness Sarah had not known was possible. Finn finished the Peterson project and started consulting for other ranches in the area, building a reputation as the man who could solve water problems. He saved his money carefully, and every Sunday, he and Sarah would walk together talking about their plans and dreams. He courted her properly, with flowers picked from the hillsides and small gifts that showed he paid attention to what she liked. A book of poetry from a traveling merchant. A length of blue fabric that matched her eyes. A comb made of real tortoiseshell for her hair. Sarah bloomed under the attention like a flower that had been starved for water and sunlight. She laughed more. She smiled freely. She let herself hope for the future instead of just grimly enduring the present. Mrs. Chen watched it all with satisfaction. "I knew he was different," she told Sarah one evening. "The way he looked at you that first day, like you were something valuable he was afraid to drop." The wedding took place on a crisp October morning at the small church in Sonora. Sarah wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from the blue fabric Finn had given her, and she carried wildflowers. Finn wore his best clothes, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion, and when he saw her walking toward him down the aisle, the expression on his face made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. Mrs. Chen and the minister's wife served as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Finn kissed her, Sarah felt something deep inside her finally settle into place. She had found her home, and it was not a place. It was this man. They moved into room 3 that evening, and Sarah stood in the middle of the space that was now theirs, feeling overwhelmed by the reality of it all. "Having second thoughts?" Finn asked quietly from the doorway. Sarah turned to him and shook her head. "No, I am having first thoughts. First time I have had my own home. First time I have had someone who is truly mine. First time I have felt like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You are exactly where you are supposed to be, with me. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Sarah had expected awkwardness or disappointment based on things other women had whispered about marriage duties. Instead, she found connection and pleasure and a sense of completion she had not known she was missing. Afterward, lying in Finn's arms in the darkness, Sarah whispered, "I was so afraid for so long, afraid of ending up trapped or used or broken. I never let myself imagine this." "What changed?" Finn asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "You," Sarah said simply. "You saw me as a person, not a problem to solve or a possession to acquire. You gave me time and space to choose. You made me feel like an equal partner instead of a burden or a prize." "You are an equal partner," Finn said firmly. "I need you to understand that, Sarah. Whatever we build from here, we build it together. Your dreams matter as much as mine. Your voice carries the same weight. That is what I want from this marriage." Sarah pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, releasing years of pent-up emotion. Finn held her through it all, not trying to fix it or stop it, just being present while she finally let go of the pain she had carried for so long. Life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah continued working for Mrs. Chen, who had become more friend than employer. Finn's reputation grew, and he was frequently called to ranches throughout the region. When the distances were not too far, Sarah went with him, enjoying the travel and the chance to see more of California. On one trip to a ranch near the Stanislaus River, Sarah watched Finn work and marveled at his skill. He studied the land, the water flow, the needs of the ranch with intense focus, then designed systems that seemed elegant in their simplicity. "You are an artist," she told him that evening as they made camp under the stars. The ranch owner had offered them a guest room, but they both preferred sleeping outdoors when the weather allowed. Finn laughed. "An artist who works in mud and water and wooden channels. Still an artist. You see possibilities others miss. You create solutions from nothing." Sarah rolled onto her side to face him. "Have you ever thought about writing down your methods, creating a guide that others could learn from?" He was quiet for a moment. "I would not know how to put it into words." "I would," Sarah said. "I could interview you, take notes on your projects, help you organize the information. We could create something valuable, Finn, something that could help people long after we are gone." The idea took root. Over the winter of 1879, during the slower months when fewer ranches needed immediate work, Sarah and Finn began collaborating on what would eventually become Emerson's Guide to Water Management in Arid Climates. Sarah interviewed her husband extensively, watched him work, took detailed notes, and then organized the information into clear, accessible prose. Finn provided the technical knowledge and hand-drawn diagrams. Working together on the project deepened their partnership in new ways. They debated approaches, challenged each other's assumptions, and discovered that their different strengths complemented each other perfectly. Finn's practical, hands-on understanding combined with Sarah's ability to articulate and organize created something neither could have produced alone. By spring, they had a completed manuscript. Finn took it to a printer in Sacramento who specialized in technical manuals. The man was skeptical at first, but after reviewing the material, he agreed to print 500 copies on speculation. "If this sells, I will print more," the printer promised. The guide sold out within 6 months. Ranchers, farmers, and municipal water managers throughout California and Nevada ordered copies. The printer sent Finn payment along with a request for a second printing of 1,000 copies. Sarah held the check in trembling hands. "Finn, this is more money than I ever imagined." "We earned it together," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What should we do with it?" They discussed options for days. They could save it for security. They could improve their living situation. They could invest in property. Finally, Sarah suggested something that made Finn's eyes light up. "What if we bought land and built our own home? Nothing extravagant but ours, with a garden and space and a place for you to have a proper workshop." The idea was intoxicating. They spent weeks riding around the areas near Sonora, looking for the right property. They finally found it on a hillside overlooking the town. 10 acres with a spring-fed creek running through it and a view that stretched for miles. They bought the land outright and began planning their home. Sarah designed a comfortable house with large windows to let in light, a modern kitchen, a library for her growing book collection, and a workshop for Finn. They hired local carpenters but did much of the work themselves, learning as they went. Mrs. Chen came to visit the building site one Sunday afternoon and stood looking at the half-finished structure with satisfaction. "You are building something good here," she said, "both of you, together." "We learned from the best," Sarah said, squeezing the older woman's hand. "You showed me it was possible to build a life on my own terms." "I showed you it was possible to survive alone," Mrs. Chen corrected. "Finn showed you it was possible to thrive together. Those are different lessons, both important." By late summer of 1880, the house was finished. Sarah and Finn moved in on a golden August evening, carrying their few possessions into rooms that echoed with emptiness and possibility. "It is ours," Sarah whispered, standing in the middle of what would be their bedroom. "Truly ours. No landlord can evict us. No one can tell us to leave." Finn understood the depth of what she was feeling. Security had been a fantasy for so long, and now it was real. They filled the house slowly, thoughtfully, with furniture they built or bought carefully. Sarah started a garden, planting vegetables and herbs and flowers. Finn built an irrigation system that was the envy of everyone who saw it. They acquired chickens, then a milk cow, then a sturdy horse for Finn's work travels. Their second year of marriage brought challenges alongside joys. Sarah miscarried twice, brief pregnancies that ended in heartbreak and physical pain. The second loss hit her especially hard. She spent days in bed, not from physical necessity but from emotional devastation. Finn took time away from work to stay with her. He did not try to minimize her grief or rush her through it. He simply held her when she cried, listened when she talked about her fears of never being able to carry a child to term, and reminded her gently that she was valuable and loved regardless of whether they had children. "I want to give you a family," Sarah said through her tears. "You deserve children." "I have a family," Finn said firmly. "You are my family. Everything else is extra. I will not lie and say I do not hope for children, but I need you to understand that you are enough. You have always been enough." Those words helped Sarah begin to heal. She saw a doctor in Sacramento who examined her and said there was no obvious reason she could not carry a pregnancy to term. Sometimes these things happened, sometimes bodies needed time. "Keep trying if you want to," the doctor said, "but do not let it consume you. Live your life." So they did. Sarah threw herself into the local community, helping establish a small lending library in Sonora and volunteering to tutor children whose families could not afford formal schooling. Finn's work continued to flourish, and the second edition of their water management guide was even more successful than the first. In the spring of 1882, Sarah realized her monthly bleeding was late. She did not tell Finn at first, afraid to hope, afraid of another disappointment. But weeks passed and the signs continued. Her breasts became tender. Certain smells made her nauseated. She was exhausted all the time. Finally, she confided in Mrs. Chen, who had remained a close friend even after Sarah moved out of the boarding house. "I think I might be pregnant again, but I am terrified to believe it," Sarah admitted. Mrs. Chen studied her carefully. "You look different this time, healthier. Sometimes the body knows when it is ready." Sarah told Finn that evening while they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His reaction was cautious joy, tempered by the fear of loss that they both carried now. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he said, taking her hand. This pregnancy was different from the start. Sarah felt sick but vitally, almost aggressively alive. Her body was asserting its determination to sustain this new life. The months passed slowly, each week a milestone they celebrated quietly. The doctor examined her regularly and proclaimed her healthy and progressing normally. Sarah's belly grew round and firm. Finn would rest his hand on it in the evenings, marveling at the movement within. They prepared a nursery in the small room next to their bedroom, painting it sunshine yellow and filling it with a cradle Finn built himself. The labor began on a cold December night in 1882. Mrs. Chen came to help, along with a midwife from town. Finn paced the hallway outside, prevented from entering by the midwife's firm instructions that this was women's work. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah screamed and swore, and at one point told everyone she had changed her mind and did not want to do this anymore. Mrs. Chen wiped her face with cool cloths and told her she was doing beautifully. Finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry filled the house. The midwife called for Finn, and he entered the bedroom to find Sarah exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "A boy," she whispered. "Finn, we have a son." He crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. His son. Their son. The tiny face was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "What should we name him?" Finn asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah had been thinking about this for months. "William, after my father. William James Emerson." Finn nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He had never imagined this. A home. A wife who was his partner and best friend, now a child. The boy he had been losing his farm and setting out alone into the world would never have believed this was possible. Little William proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with a strong set of lungs. Those first months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sarah and Finn took turns walking the floor with him at night. They marveled over every small development, every smile and sound. Mrs. Chen visited weekly, bringing food and practical advice. "You are good parents," she told them one afternoon, watching Sarah nurse the baby while Finn prepared dinner. "You work as a team. That child is lucky." As William grew from infant to toddler, Sarah found herself settling into motherhood with more ease than she had expected. She had worried she would feel trapped or diminished, but instead she felt expanded. The love she had for this small person opened up new parts of herself she had not known existed. Finn was a devoted father, building toys and playing endless games of chase. He included William in his work when possible, carrying the boy on his shoulders as he walked the property or inspected water systems. "Never too early to learn," he would say. When William was 2, Sarah found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do now. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1885, arriving quickly and efficiently, as if eager to meet the world. "She looks like you," Finn said, studying the baby's features. Sarah looked down at the dark-haired girl in her arms. "I think she looks like herself, strong and determined." They named her Eleanor Rose, and she proved to be as different from her brother as possible. Where William was cautious and thoughtful, Eleanor was bold and impulsive. She walked early, talked early, and had opinions about everything from what she would wear to what she would eat. "She is going to be a force of nature," Sarah said one evening, watching 3-year-old Eleanor refuse to go to bed by sheer force of will. "She gets that from her mother," Finn replied, grinning. Life was full and rich and sometimes chaotic. Sarah balanced motherhood with her tutoring work and her partnership in Finn's business. They published updated editions of the Water Management Guide and began work on a second book focused on small-scale farming techniques. The children grew. William started formal schooling in Sonora when he turned 6, eager to learn everything he could. Eleanor declared school boring and only attended under protest, preferring to spend her time helping Finn in his workshop or following Sarah around the garden. "That girl is going to invent her own path through life," Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon. She was older now, in her 70s, but still sharp and active, just like her mother did. The years passed in the way years do when life is good, both quickly and slowly at once. Each day felt full, but looking back, Sarah could hardly believe how much time had passed. William turned 12, then 13, growing tall and lanky like his father. Eleanor was 11, all wild curls and fierce independence. Finn's hair began to gray at the temples. Sarah found laugh lines around her own eyes and did not mind them. They were evidence of happiness, of a life well lived. In the spring of 1893, Finn was offered a position as a consultant to the state government, advising on water projects throughout California. It would mean more travel, but also more influence and the ability to implement changes on a larger scale. "What do you think?" he asked Sarah as they discussed the offer on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. "I think you should do it," Sarah said. "You have knowledge that could help thousands of people. It would be selfish to keep it to ourselves." "The children are old enough now that they do not need you here constantly," Finn mused. "You could come with me sometimes. We could make it an adventure." Sarah liked that idea. She was 42 years old, and while she loved her home and her life in Sonora, part of her still craved new experiences, new challenges. Finn took the position. For the next several years, they traveled extensively throughout California. William, mature for his age, often stayed home to manage the property with the help of a hired hand. Eleanor usually came with them, treating each trip as a grand expedition. Sarah saw more of her adopted state than she had ever imagined. They traveled from the northern forests to the southern deserts, from coastal cities to mountain towns. Everywhere they went, Finn consulted on water projects, and Sarah documented their work, building material for future publications. In San Francisco, they attended a reception where Finn was honored for his contributions to agricultural development. Sarah wore a new dress in deep blue silk and felt like a different person from the desperate, dusty woman who had walked into Sonora 15 years earlier. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, watching her face as they danced at the reception. "How far we have come," Sarah said softly. "How impossible this would have seemed once. I used to think just surviving was the best I could hope for. Then you showed me what thriving looked like." Finn pulled her closer. We showed each other. I was surviving too, Sarah, going through the motions, telling myself work was enough. You taught me that a full life requires more than just getting by. It requires connection and vulnerability and love. They danced in silence for a moment, surrounded by glittering people and music and light, but aware only of each other. The years continued their march. William graduated from school and announced his intention to study engineering in Sacramento. Finn was so proud he could barely speak. Eleanor, at 16, declared she had no interest in traditional schooling, but wanted to learn business and perhaps open a shop in Sonora selling the produce from their farm and crafted goods. "Why should we sell everything wholesale when we could get better prices directly?" she argued. "And I could carry goods from other local farms too. We all benefit." Sarah recognized her own entrepreneurial spirit in her daughter and helped her develop a business plan. By the time Eleanor was 18, she had a thriving storefront in town and a reputation as a shrewd but fair businesswoman. Mrs. Chen died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1899, at the age of 86. Sarah was heartbroken. The older woman had been friend, mentor, and surrogate mother. At the funeral, Sarah spoke about what Mrs. Chen had taught her about resilience and independence, and the importance of building something that could not be taken away. "She showed me that being alone did not mean being weak," Sarah said to the gathered crowd, "but she also showed me, through her example and her wisdom, that there was a difference between being alone and being lonely. She chose the former but never succumbed to the latter. Her strength gave me the foundation to recognize true partnership when it finally arrived in my life." Finn held her hand through the service and the burial, solid and supportive as he had always been. The new century arrived with celebration and speculation about what the future might hold. William finished his engineering degree and was immediately hired by a firm in Sacramento working on urban water systems. Eleanor's shop expanded to include a small cafe serving meals made from local ingredients. Sarah and Finn found themselves alone in their home again. The children launched into their own lives. It was an adjustment at first. The quiet after years of activity. "I feel like I should miss them more," Sarah admitted one evening. "But mostly I'm proud of them." "They are good people building good lives," Finn agreed. "We did well." They settled into this new phase with contentment. Finn cut back on his consulting work, preferring to stay closer to home. Sarah continued her tutoring but also began work on a memoir documenting her journey from desperate survival to genuine thriving. Writing the memoir forced Sarah to look back at her life with honest eyes. She wrote about the hardships and the losses, but also about the moments of grace and the people who had helped her along the way. She wrote about the day she walked into Sonora, exhausted and alone, and how she could never have imagined the life that was waiting for her. Most of all, she wrote about Finn, about how he had seen her when she was invisible to others, how he had valued her when she felt worthless, how he had given her space to heal and time to trust and partnership instead of possession. "You changed my life," she told him one evening, reading excerpts from the manuscript aloud. "Before you, I was fighting to survive. After you, I learned to truly live." Finn listened with tears in his eyes. "You changed mine too. I was alone, but did not know how lonely I was until I met you. You gave me purpose beyond work. You gave me a home in the truest sense of the word." On their 25th wedding anniversary in October of 1904, their children arranged a celebration at the house. William came from Sacramento with his new wife, a sensible young teacher he had met at a lecture series. Eleanor brought her beau, a rancher's son who treated her like an equal and had Finn's grudging approval. They gathered on the porch as the sun set, 3 generations now, and told stories about the past quarter century. Sarah looked around at the faces of these people she loved, at the home they had built together, and felt a sense of completion so profound it took her breath away. "Thank you," she whispered to Finn later that night, when everyone had gone and they were alone in their bedroom. "For what?" "For seeing me, for wanting me, for making sure I could thrive instead of just survive." Finn pulled her close, his embrace still as warm and secure as it had been 25 years earlier. "I will never stop making sure of that. Every day for the rest of our lives." The years that followed were gentle ones. William had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and brought them to visit regularly. Eleanor married her rancher and moved to a property just outside Sonora, close enough to visit often. Sarah and Finn became grandparents who spoiled shamelessly and sent the children home hyped up on cookies and excitement. Finn's health began to fade slowly in his late 60s. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual wearing down of a body that had worked hard for decades. He moved more slowly, tired more easily. Sarah watched it happen with quiet sorrow, knowing this was the natural order of things but hating it anyway. They had one final trip together in the summer of 1914, returning to the hillside where Finn had first told Sarah he was staying in Sonora, where he had first kissed her all those decades ago. The town had grown and changed, but this spot remained relatively unchanged. "Do you remember?" Finn asked, holding her hand as they looked out over the valley. "Every second," Sarah replied. "I was so afraid that night, afraid to hope, afraid to trust, afraid to want something for myself." "You were the bravest person I had ever met," Finn said. "You had every reason to be bitter and closed off, but you chose to be open. You chose to take a chance on me. Best choice I ever made." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had built a life from nothing but determination and love, who had faced hardships and celebrated joys, who had learned that thriving was not about avoiding struggles, but about facing them together. Finn died peacefully in his sleep in the autumn of 1916, 2 weeks after their 38th wedding anniversary. He was 64 years old. Sarah woke beside him that morning and knew immediately that he was gone. She lay next to him for a long time, holding his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had transformed her life. The grief was immense, but Sarah did not break under it. She mourned deeply and honestly, letting herself feel the pain of loss without trying to minimize or escape it. Her children rallied around her, providing support and love. But Sarah did not collapse. She had learned too much, come too far, built too solid a foundation. Finn had not saved her from a life of struggle. He had given her the tools and support to save herself, to build something lasting, to thrive instead of merely surviving. She continued living in their home, tending the garden, writing, spending time with her grandchildren. She published her memoir in 1918, dedicating it to Finn and Mrs. Chen, the two people who had most profoundly shaped her path. The book found an audience among women who saw their own struggles reflected in Sarah's story. She received letters from across the country, from women who were fighting their own battles to build lives on their own terms. Sarah answered every letter, offering encouragement and solidarity. William and Eleanor tried to convince her to move in with one of them, to not live alone in the house on the hill. Sarah refused gently but firmly. "This is my home," she said. "Your father and I built it together, and I'm not leaving it. I am not lonely. I am not helpless. I am living my life on my own terms, just as I always have." She lived in that house for another 12 years, active and engaged until the very end. She died in her sleep in the spring of 1928, at the age of 72, in the bed she had shared with Finn for so many years. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, with a slight smile on her face. On her nightstand was a photograph taken on their wedding day, two young people who had been brave enough to believe in something better. Sarah Vance Emerson was buried next to Finn on a hillside overlooking Sonora, with a view that stretched for miles. Her headstone bore a simple inscription that Eleanor had chosen: "She never stopped trying to live, and because of love, she truly thrived." At the memorial service, attended by family and friends and former students and people whose lives had been touched by Sarah's memoir, William spoke about his mother's legacy. "My mother taught me that strength is not about never falling down," he said. "It is about getting back up every single time. She taught me that love is not about losing yourself in another person. It is about becoming more fully yourself through partnership. She taught me that surviving is not the same as living, and that we all deserve the chance to thrive." Eleanor spoke about how her mother had shown her what it meant to be a woman of substance in a world that often did not value women beyond their usefulness to men. "She built a life with my father, not for him," Eleanor said. "She remained fully herself while being fully his partner. That is the example I have tried to follow in my own life, and that is the legacy I will pass on to my daughters." The youngest grandchildren would barely remember Sarah in the years to come, but they would grow up knowing her story. They would know about the woman who walked into Sonora with nothing but determination and dignity, who met a cowboy who saw her value, and who built a life that mattered. They would know that their grandmother had been a teacher and a writer and a businesswoman and a mother, but most of all, she had been herself, completely and unapologetically. And they would know about Finn, the man who had loved her not despite her strength, but because of it, who had given her the support she needed to transform surviving into thriving, who had understood that true partnership meant walking side by side rather than one person leading and the other following. The house on the hill stood for many more decades, eventually becoming the home of Eleanor's daughter, then her granddaughter. Each generation added their own touches but kept the bones of what Sarah and Finn had built together. The irrigation system Finn designed, with Sarah's help documenting and refining his methods, influenced water management practices throughout the American West. Their books remained in print and in use well into the 20th century, but their truest legacy was not measured in books or buildings or innovations. It was measured in the lives they had touched, the example they had set, and the proof they had provided that it was possible to find genuine partnership even in a world that often seemed designed to prevent it. Sarah had been the woman who never stopped trying to live, pushing forward through every obstacle, refusing to surrender to despair or defeat. Finn had been the man who recognized her strength and determination as assets rather than threats, who had made sure she had the support and space she needed to not just survive, but to genuinely thrive. Together they had built something beautiful and lasting. A love story that was also a story about resilience, about partnership, about refusing to accept that merely getting by was enough. They had shown that it was possible to be fully yourself while also being fully committed to another person, that true love did not require diminishment or surrender, that the right partner could help you become more of who you were always meant to be rather than less. And in the end, That was the greatest gift they gave to everyone who knew them, or knew of them. Hope. Proof. The knowledge that transformation was possible, that help could come from unexpected places, that the right person at the right time could change everything. Sarah had walked into Sonora exhausted and desperate, looking for just enough to survive another day. She had found so much more. She had found home, partnership, love, purpose, and ultimately the chance to stop merely trying to live and to actually fully, completely thrive.